Hey there, I'm Emily, a newly 29-year-old. Many years ago, I made the incredibly stupid decision of hitching myself to a man with more issues than mental space. I had the romantic notion that love would save everything. I thought I could be the one to teach him how worthy he was. Boy, was I wrong. Love is powerful, but it does not have the magical ability to teach a person to love themselves. My ex, I'll call him Joseph, was very intense about making his parents happy. I'm not talking about the regular desire to please one's parents. His insatiable need for their approval was so deeply ingrained that it shaped everything he did and seemed to be the ruler by which his very identity was measured. Now, about his parents, whom we'll call Mr. and Mrs. Ellis to keep things anonymous. They were a classic case of parents who didn't really engage with their son's life, leaving him desperate for their attention and approval. It was truly sad to see. I quickly figured out that I couldn't fill the emotional gap left by his parents. What's worse, Joseph had this terrible habit of blowing our savings on whatever his parents wanted. Yes, I'm talking about over-the-top gifts, fancy vacations, and all kinds of splurges that were completely unnecessary. Our money seemed to flow directly into Mr. and Mrs. Ellis's pockets, making their disregard even more frustrating for me. This reckless spending was a constant source of fights between us. It felt like I was competing with his parents for his priorities, and it was draining our marriage. Despite the turmoil and never-ending disagreements, my care for Joseph didn't waver. I hoped he could escape the unrealistic expectations of his parents and discover true joy within himself. Yet, it became painfully clear that my love alone wasn't enough to pull him from the grasp of their harmful influence. Brace yourselves, because this roller coaster story takes an even sharper turn. One day, Joseph came to me with a serious look, hinting he had something major to share. Having been through many ups and downs with him, I braced myself for what was next, unaware of the bombshell about to be dropped. As Joseph started the conversation, I had a gut feeling it would escalate into our biggest disagreement yet. "Emily, there's something crucial I need to discuss," he said, setting a serious tone. "What's going on?" I inquired, already tensing up for what might come next. "It's about my parents. They're retiring soon. I've been thinking of gifting them a luxury vacation as a surprise. It's going to cost a pretty penny," he shared with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "That sounds lovely, as long as the money is coming from your personal savings. I really don't want to dip into our joint savings again," I said, hoping to avoid another financial argument. "I don't have enough to cover it myself," he admitted. "I was hoping to use some of our savings." Joseph admitted this, looking hopeful yet anxious. "Joseph, if it's beyond what we can comfortably afford, maybe we should reconsider the expense," I suggested gently, trying to bring him back to reality. But he quickly lost his cool. "You just don't get it, Emily. I love my parents. I want to do something extraordinary for them. Love isn't about counting every penny spent. It's about grand gestures," he argued passionately. I counted. But love is also about being there for each other and making sacrifices together, not at the cost of our financial stability. This trip might mean a lot to them, but we have to think about our future too, I reasoned, hoping to find some middle ground. Joseph was insistent. "I have to do this for them. I thought you, of all people, would understand. They're everything to me, and you're everything to me." "Joseph, but we have to be practical. We can't just use up all our savings on one trip," I said, hoping to find common ground. He accused me of being selfish, unable to see the importance of his gesture. "It's not about being selfish. It's about being sensible and planning for what's ahead," I explained, wondering just how much he planned to spend. When he said he needed all of it, my heart sank. All of our savings, Joseph? That's just reckless, I said, shocked by the magnitude of his request. You're being heartless, he retorted, convinced I couldn't understand his desire to please his parents. No, Joseph, I'm being realistic. We can't afford to give away $85,000 on a whim, I said, my patience wearing thin. His casual mention of getting the money back later only added to my frustration. Really, Joseph? That's not how this works, I snapped back, my sarcasm barely veiling my disbelief. It was clear we were at an impasse. Our views on love, responsibility, and financial security were clashing more than ever. The argument reached a fever pitch. Our voices weren't the only things escalating. Suddenly, objects were taking flight, shattering upon impact, as if to punctuate our heated exchange. In this chaos, Joseph dropped a bombshell, declaring that if I couldn't back him up on this, he wanted a divorce. He probably expected me to panic, to claw desperately at the fragments of our marriage. But I didn't. Instead, I gathered all the serenity and resolve I could muster and simply responded, "Okay, Joseph, if that's truly what you desire." The astonishment on his face was a sight to behold. He had anticipated tears, begging, even. But what he got was my unwavering stance. I was done indulging and fostering his fantasies. If he wished to squander his future chasing shadows, he was free to do so without me. I didn't mince my words. I laid it all bare. I made it clear that his endless quest for his parents' approval was as futile as trying to shield oneself from a storm with just an umbrella. An exercise in futility. He attempted to counter, but a simple raise of my hand stopped him cold. I declared my exhaustion from battling for a love ensnared by unrealistic expectations and an unending thirst for validation. Go ahead, spend your fortune chasing after those who hardly glance your way, I told him, firm in my resolve to end the cycle of letdowns and empty promises. And just like that, the harsh truth struck him. The grim reality of our predicament finally dawned on him. Our marriage had deteriorated into a war zone, and it was time to hoist the white flag and seek peace on individual paths. A month has passed since the divorce was finalized, and I can honestly say the feeling of liberation is utterly exhilarating. Gone are the days of grieving. No more endless disputes over finances or yearning for approval that was never ours to win. Now I'm breathing freely, freed from the heavy load of his doubts that once shadowed my days. The sun seems to shine a bit more brightly with each new day. True, Joseph made attempts to sneak back into my life, cloaked in concern and queries about my well-being. Yet, I could easily see through his facade. There was no way I was going to fall for his act once more. As the saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I decisively turned away from his efforts to reignite any spark that was once there. I had realized I'd invested too much in trying to repair someone uninterested in changing. It was high time I shifted the focus to my own growth and joy. Rebuilding wasn't a walk in the park, let me be clear. Splitting our shared assets and getting accustomed to a different financial reality demanded patience and resilience. I was used to a certain way of living, but adapting wasn't foreign to me. I embraced the hard work required to reconstruct my life anew, discovering a strength and independence I hadn't known were within me. Rekindling old friendships, diving back into hobbies I'd put on the back burner, and discovering new interests made the world feel vast and full of possibilities. I was keen to make the most of this fresh start. Certainly, there were moments filled with self-doubt and solitude, and adjusting to a new budget was a hurdle. The wounds from a dissolved marriage don't heal overnight. Yet, with each day that passed, I found comfort in the fact that I was no longer sacrificing my happiness to cater to someone else's insecurities. The ease with which I moved forward might have been a sign that I had been clinging to a lost cause for too long. It amazed me how much I could achieve once freed from that burden. So there I was, a month later, still navigating through adjustments, but flourishing all the same. Joseph's incessant messaging had taken a new turn. He was now painting himself as the protagonist of a dramatic tale, claiming to be in danger and insisting on a meeting. Exhausted by his constant attempts to contact me, I decided it was time to confront the situation. In the midst of his ongoing messages, I called him. "Joseph, we've been through this. We're divorced. It's time for us to move on," I firmly stated. "Emily, please. I just need a moment to explain. I'm in serious trouble, and you're the only one I can turn to for help," he implored. Perhaps it was the long absence of his voice, or maybe he truly sounded scared, but against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. "Fine, but we're not meeting at my place. Let's go to that cafe we used to frequent." "No tricks," I said. "Understood," he replied, sounding relieved. "Thank you, Emily. I promise I just need someone to listen. You're the only one who gets me. I know what you're thinking. Emily, why would you agree to meet Joseph after everything?" Believe me, I questioned my own decision. Yet, there's a part of us that sometimes gives in to a mix of curiosity and a lingering shred of concern, no matter how strong we are. I couldn't ignore his plea. Divorced or not, part of me still cared. So there we sat, opposite each other in the charming bistro, surrounded by the comforting aroma of coffee. However, not even the pleasant scent could soften the thick air of tension between us. Observing Joseph with anxiety etched across his face, and his attempts to pull at my heartstrings with those sorrowful eyes was almost amusing this time. However, I wasn't swayed. Leaning back, I maintained a composed demeanor, ready to hear him out, yet firmly in control. I had every intention of steering this conversation on my terms. "Okay, Joseph, you've got my attention for now. What's this danger you've supposedly found yourself in? And just to be clear, playing the hero isn't on my agenda anymore. I'm done cleaning up after your messes," I said, keeping my tone firm yet open. Joseph exhaled deeply, his face a mix of regret and desperation that was almost pitiful to see. However, I steeled myself against any emotional manipulation. "I know I've made mistakes before, Emily, but this situation is different. I've gotten involved with some seriously bad people. I owe them a lot of money, and they're not known for their patience," he confessed. I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow, skeptical of his dramatic story. "Really, Joseph? Dangerous people? Are we revisiting the tale of your imaginary friends who seem to attract trouble?" I couldn't hide my disbelief. Joseph's expression shifted to one of hurt and frustration, evidently hoping for a more sympathetic ear. "No, Emily, this isn't made up. I'm in deep trouble, and coming to you was my last resort," he insisted, his voice laced with desperation. "So let me guess. You spiraled after our divorce, and now you're in debt. Was it that trip you mentioned?" I couldn't keep my voice down, drawing curious glances from other cafe patrons. I shot them an apologetic look, trying to regain my composure. "Look, I got caught up in something foolish, I admit, but now I'm in a mess that's bigger than I can handle alone," Joseph admitted, his gaze pleading. My frustration was close to boiling over. How could he waltz back into my life with yet another crisis? Yet, underneath the anger, I couldn't completely ignore the remaining shred of empathy for him. "How much are you in for?" I asked, bracing myself. $45,000, Joseph responded sheepishly. $445,000. "Joseph, are you out of your mind?" The cafe's patrons turned their heads, their stares sharp as knives. This time, I didn't bother to offer an apology to the surrounding cafe patrons for my outburst. If they were in my shoes, hearing what I was hearing, they'd likely react the same way. Emily, please, I'm begging you. I've got nowhere else to turn. I know I've made a mess of things, but you're the one person who really believed in me, Joseph pleaded, his eyes shining with a sincerity that reminded me of the man I once loved. But those days were long gone, and my priority now was self-preservation, even if it meant walking away from him. Don't pull at my heartstrings, Joseph. It's way too late for that. When you said you needed help, it was at most $112,000. But $45,000? You've completely lost it, I responded, my voice a mix of disbelief and indignation. Overwhelmed, Joseph began to cry, oblivious to the uncomfortable glances from others. Joseph, calm down. This isn't the place for a scene. What's going to happen if you don't pay this back? I asked, trying to grasp the full extent of his predicament. They're threatening to harm me, Emily. I'm not joking. This is really bad, he managed between sobs. Recognizing the gravity of his situation, I softened a bit. Okay, Joseph, start from the beginning. Tell me everything, I urged. He recounted his story, explaining his desperate attempt to finance an extravagant trip for his parents. He'd relied on a friend who ultimately let him down, leaving him ensnared in significant debt. As he shared his tale, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, frustration at his recklessness, and a begrudging amusement at the irony of his situation. So you borrowed from dangerous people to impress your parents who haven't even acknowledged your efforts? That's what you're saying? I asked, my tone laced with incredulity. Joseph's face fell, tears streaking down his cheeks as he acknowledged the bitter truth. It's true, he admitted. Since they went on that trip, it's as if I don't exist to them. The remorse in his voice was palpable. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for him. It was a harsh dose of reality for Joseph, facing the consequences of his decisions head-on. As much as I wanted to detach myself, seeing him so vulnerable and regretful stirred a compassion within me. What a complex situation you've entangled yourself in, I said. Indeed, Joseph, I know the last thing you want to hear is, I told you so, but you did bring this upon yourself. I warned you that it wasn't a smart move. Worse yet, you chose to divorce me over it, and now here you are at a loss. You sought their approval, investing everything into their wishes, only to be met with silence. It's a tough lesson, but it's one you needed to learn. The words were heavy with both concern and resignation. This situation was a difficult reality for both of us to face. Joseph had pinned his self-worth on people who couldn't value his sacrifices, and I had to accept that I couldn't shield him from his own decisions any longer. I had hoped that facing such dire consequences would make him see that I had always been in his corner. Reducing himself to merely someone seeking parental approval was his undoing. As we sat there enveloped in silence, the weight of our past filled with broken promises and dreams pressed down on us. At that moment, I realized it was time to let go completely. No more second chances. No more trying to repair the irreparable. Joseph needed to confront the repercussions of his actions on his own, and I had to pursue my happiness elsewhere. I do hope you find a way out of this, Joseph, I offered, my voice tinged with a finality that surprised even me. You're not going to help? Joseph looked at me in disbelief. What the heck? No, I replied. Joseph, I can't help you. And why not? He asked. Because I don't have the resources to bail you out, and even if I could, taking a loan I'd spend a lifetime repaying is out of the question. I can't afford to be as careless as you've been, I explained, my resolve firm. Come on, Emily, please, I'm begging you, he persisted, his desperation clear. Joseph, Expecting me to jump in and solve this for you, especially with how you're acting, is unrealistic, I said, my patience wearing thin. Yeah, I did expect that. You're my ex-wife, not my enemy, he replied, still holding on to a sliver of hope. But it was clear our paths had diverged too far. My journey was now about finding peace and joy, independent of the chaos that surrounded him. And that's exactly where the problem lies, Joseph. You assume I'll always be around to pick up the pieces, because that's what I've always done. I was your wife. It was natural for me to help you out of your troubles, but I can't and shouldn't keep doing that. It's not my job, nor my responsibility. After everything, I don't owe you anything, especially considering how our hard-earned money was wasted on your unappreciative and toxic parents. It's because I love them, Joseph said. But I love myself too, and loving myself means doing what's best for me, which includes protecting my well-being, I responded. Joseph lowered his gaze, a sign of concession, understanding that the assistance he sought wouldn't come from me. Since it seems you're out of options, I'll offer you one piece of advice. Leave. Move somewhere far away where they can't reach you. If that's not something you can manage, then I'm not sure what more you expect from me. He sat there silent, his demeanor shifting to one of irritation, seemingly upset by my firm stance on not rescuing him this time. It's time for us to go our separate ways, Joseph. I can't allow myself to be pulled back into the turmoil of your life. We both deserve to find our peace, I said, hoping he'd understand. If you wished me well, you'd help, he retorted. Goodbye, Joseph. I'm changing my number, I declared, standing up to leave. As I walked away, Joseph remained seated, his expression a complex mix of feelings. It was a difficult yet essential step I had to take for the sake of my happiness and